This is my first official, kind of official, um, live stream. Um, I have no idea what I'm doing. This is very new to me. Um, Always, I want to establish um, my purpose as a biological mother. I like to use the terminology maternal biologic, um, just because it sounds more techy, and that's the only reason why. Um, and I also want to establish what my every endeavor is, in case anyone's not heard of the name Dawn Henderson. Um, I have a personal mission to end child trafficking. Um, I've gone on and on and on like a crazy person, um, and I've learned so much uh, being against human trafficking, uh, as far as learning how much it's used in the entertainment industry. And I'm not trying to be entertaining at all. And I'm going to continue to mention, um, because as I'm speaking again, it's whatever platform I find. Um, right now, I hear someone being aggressive towards a child again. And I don't want to air this. I want to find a new way of conveying my message. I recently, I'm having problems with my Netflix account, my personal Netflix account. And I've only had the Netflix account for um, a few weeks, like maybe 6 weeks. And um, frequently, when I get onto my Netflix account, there's problems, and I have a difficult time um, getting into my Netflix account. Now my camera is doing the same thing that it does um, when I'm on Facebook, which is it switches back and forth because my identity has been stolen. And when I started to talk about on my Facebook page this morning, and again, my camera just switched. Not views, but whenever the I know more than uh, the behind the scenes people want me to know. Um, I watched a series recently on Netflix. Now I can't. Oh, Dead to Me, and although I didn't like the title of it, and my children I don't even know what I'm saying right now because it's being switched back and forth so frequently. I have a younger sister. Uh, my identification has been passed around so many times that um, it's difficult for me to express my own thoughts and my own uh, uh, existences because my own experience, because my identity has been sought after for such a long time. And one of the earliest realizations that I had at the um, onset of my identification documents being stolen, there's a lot involved um, with identity theft and whatnot. And now it's even more involved. And I found just probably an hour and a half ago, a a strategy, a digital strategy that the transgender population is using, and I'm not a transgender person, and I I don't I don't like the fact that my first official introduction to a transgender person was at one of the shelters I was at called the Dolores Project. And the person, I'm not going to mention the person's name, the person was very distraught personality. And I had conversations with the person, and um, honestly, I can't remember if this person was going from male to female or female to male. And already, no, the person was in the process of going from male to female. And and I had conversations with her, and I was asking her about we got into a conversation about foster care because she was telling me that her childhood growing up was very difficult. She went through foster care. She experienced a lot of abuse as a foster care um, child, and I didn't. The reason we got into the conversation was because I was probably talking about the fact that my child had just entered foster care, or that came up somewhere in the conversation. That was in 2012, 2011, late 2011, early 2012. And what I realize now about that particular shelter was was an expectancy, an unwritten expectancy that clients that entered that particular shelter were agreeing to have a transgender operation. And I didn't realize that at the time. It was not a spoken or written contingency. But in retrospect, I realize that that was part of I want to say channeling. Channeling isn't the right word because that goes in the mystic networking. Um, that was the invisible hand guidance. And since that shelter, I've felt pressured to to be part of a transgendering community. And it's actually much more prevalent than anyone realizes. So that shelter is still a part of my experience. So I'm still being guided into the company of transgender people who, as a population or as an idea of a chronologically aged adult, I didn't have a problem with. What I had a problem with more recently is that what the conversations now, my initial, but in more recent years, when I had conversations with um, a transgender person, the conversation was constantly going to very explicit sexual content. And I don't do sexual content in my um, conversations, not even with my best friends, as you know, best friends that I've had for years. Um, and I never have. Um, and so then began to be bombarded with transgender anger. And because I asked the person, who I found to be a rather pleasant person, other than the fact that she constantly had, and she had already been transgendered, this newer person, years later. And then I went to another shelter, which was a domestic violence shelter. And I found myself in a confrontation, not an aggressive confrontation as far as mine towards the person questioning me, but the person questioning me was aggressive, in and she was an employee of this domestic violence shelter. And it all switches back and forth each and every time my computing device um, does like a freeze frame thing, like, oh gosh, my computer's got to think about this for a minute. Um, and so the employee, um, I'm trying to think if the employee introduced me to the concept of the he, she, the pronoun thing. And I'm so fed up with everybody else's needs, who need to put their needs before, who need to put me to put their needs before I put my own needs and my children's needs. And that's not right to do to somebody when you're trying to establish a friendship. Um, and so the employee called me, and there was, I didn't have any confrontations with any of the, and in fact I didn't know that any of the residents of this particular domestic violence shelter um had been transgendered. Everybody was sort of kept to themselves. I don't know. But I don't know where and or why the employee called me into the office at a domestic violence shelter and started to have a conversation with me about the pronoun thing. And I think that really what was going on was the the transgender population was establishing a new political strategy and would decided, like many others have, to use me as their catalyst for, even though I never had any um I never expressed any kind of disagreements um or personal abhorrence to an individual who had a transgender population or operation. What I have said is it's not for me. And I have a right to state that. I mean, if the conversation is going in a way, and I'm an honest person, and if someone is telling me they're having a transgender population, having a transgender operation, and I say, um, from experience, I need to state up front that for myself, I do not choose to have a transgender operation. Not now and not ever. I can be friends with a transgender person. I can be friends with a transgender person who's not constantly having an explicit sexual content injected into our conversation. I don't want to hear about the transgenders' um, sexual life. I don't want to hear about a non-transgender's um, sexual life. I don't share that kind of information about my life, except for nowadays, I stayed up front. I'm abstinent. I'm staying abstinent because the sexual drive from pretty much every person eh, that I am, I don't want to say introduced to, that I've met, transgender or not, it's like every person is so very sexually driven because of the porn- pornography that is that has uh, um, saturated the our psyches, whether we wanted to or not. And I've mentioned the experience of going as a homeless person in like 2014. I became homeless in 2007, and and in June of 2021 got housing finally. So pretty much any time period that I um am talking about. Anyway, I as a homeless person in like 2012, um I went to the Denver Public Library frequently, and they have the Denver Public Library, and I'm coming up as they, and I'll talk about that again in a minute. Um, the Denver Public Library has approximately, I'm trying to put my words succinctly, because I don't want my words or my name to be digitally attached to something I don't want it attached to. The Denver Public Library had approximately 100, I want to say more. I'm trying to picture the room now, the computer room, which is on the top, not the top level. I can't remember what level it's at, the third or fourth level. And there's like 100 to 150, let's say, computers. And I would walk into there, to the computer room, because there was really nothing else to do but to get on the computer as a homeless person and either try to find a job, or try to find a shelter, or try to find, something. And a considerable number of men, some sitting with younger females, sat and watched pornography on public computers. And I'm talking at least probably half of the people, the men who were there. And the room was always full. So if there's 150 computers, there's like 150 and people in there, and sometimes more, because a lot of times there were two people sitting at a computer, and so and it was every day, and I found it upsetting, disturbing, that the librarians didn't have any control to go over and say, excuse me, but that content is not allowed on the computers. And I would think, actually, that the Denver Public Library would be able to block pornographic information and pornographic material through their IT department. But either they didn't bother, or maybe the people who entered the room had more computer savvy experience and were able to override the Denver. I don't want to get into the legal battle of the Denver Public Library against the people who present themselves as very dangerous looking people. The race card has gone so far that an innocent person has very little ability to um, to protect themselves against what is obvious, and including being exposed to pornographic material and really bombarded, even just going down the road, just walking down Colfax. You got to wonder if you're being seen as a hooker, or if you're being seen as a John or a pimp. Seriously. And and so the reason I brought the race card issue into it is because so many people have learned to use the race card, because so many people have gotten away with it, and it's a strategy. And it can it, if anybody with any kind of logical active logical brain cells can stop and listen. I've heard people say from other races, oh, Black people can't be racist, Asian people can't be racist, um, as a point of view that, oh, they're just so above being a racist. And that all comes back on me. I'm a blonde haired, blue eyed, what people would call a white person. And I'm not a racist. And I don't care what anybody says. Me standing up against the race card as a strategy doesn't make me a racist either. The fact that in 1996 or 97, when I made a comment that I said, why are we as American citizens expected to now have to learn two languages, and at the time it was Spanish, to be employable in our own country? And this was before um, this was when the bilingual requirement was just beginning in Colorado. It was only just beginning. And the race card is a strategy. And what I'm saying is that even the apartments right next door that call themselves My Essay is a Mexican gang. I'm not Mexican. I don't have a gang that's called um, uh, uh, anything that has to do with my race. I'm a Christian first and foremost, and Jesus is my Lord and Savior. And I'm not trying to turn this into a a what do you call it? A a sermon. Um, and then after Jesus comes my children. And then after that comes my children, my biological children's biological fathers. And every time I say the word father, here comes Gene F. Henderson II into my psyche. He's not my father. I denounce Gene F. Henderson II as a father, and he's definitely not my husband, because that's another role he tries to force his way into in my psyche and out and about. And the only way he can reach my psyche is because he uses secret societies, which use and play a race card also. And that race card is based on the culture of a secret society that claims children as brides and or grooms. So the race card has become not just a black and white issue. It's become a strategy used by every culture, every culture. And and that's too much weight for me to bear. And for me to stand up on a constant basis because of how often, how frequently the race card is thrown at me, And they don't even recognize, or the law doesn't recognize, or the media doesn't recognize that the people who are throwing race card are members of gangs or get support and or money from gangs which are specifically created for political purposes for their own culture. And I don't have that. And I don't know how much clearer I can make it. The race card is a strategy. It's not a true thing. And then, in addition to what I said just then, I'm living in a world where I'm going to a shelter and there's a specific population culture of people which I don't belong to, laughing and carrying on as I'm walking past the on the sidewalk in front of the shelter, walking past some kind of grayish jelly like substance on the sidewalk. And the members of this particular culture, and it's not the African American culture, it's another organized special interest group culture. And they're laughing and directing, watching me walk past this and saying, "That's Jennifer, that's your daughter, Jennifer." And these are the kind of conversations I have to hear and have had to hear in regard to the threats that other cultures, special interest cultures, have made to me on a constant basis, knowing, because gangs make it their business to know what's going on in your life. Okay? Um, and then I've told this story several times, and it's a true, honest to God, true story. And a month and a half later, I was walking by Barnes and Noble, and in the oh, and they were saying it was my daughter Jennifer's brain. And and I stopped and I was like, because at first I was like, what is that? What is that? And that's when I stopped and looked, that's when they all started laughing and carrying on. Now, if you think, or if anybody thinks that people don't get organized and blatant um, to the most vulnerable person in the crowd, you are delusional. And so a month and a half later, I was walking by the Barnes and Noble and happened to notice what looked like a cantaloupe skin on the landscaping. And I stopped there because I was catching the bus, which is the bus stop is right in front of, or on the side of, the Barnes and Noble. And the landscaping thing was convenient to lean against if the bench was full. And I shouldn't have to explain my every motivation um, when the instance is such a violent and aggressive towards me, who is the exponentially more vulnerable person in the scenario. And yet I'm the one who's constantly having to uh, explain or defend myself. And as I've stated, I'm not trying to be a linebacker for any NFL team or any other football team on any level, be it high school or elementary school or any level at all. And if you don't understand that comment, I don't have time to explain it right now. I need to get back to this story. And when I got closer to look to see, um, it didn't look like a cantaloupe anymore. It looked like it could be the scalp of a person that had been dried and placed there strategically for me to see 6 weeks after they were joking and laughing and trying to convince me that my daughter's brain was splattered on the sidewalk in front of the shelter where I was at. Then 6 weeks again later, I was going to and the 6 weeks part isn't exact, it's an approximate because I can't remember. I can't remember exactly the time in between these three connecting um, uh, incidents. So approximately 6 weeks after the second incident, then I was going to the recreation center to work out and shower, and which I had a membership for. And as I was walking towards the recreation center, and in front of the recreation center office was a shattered skull on the sidewalk. Honest, true story. And this was one of the more aggressive subliminal messages I was being sent by a specific um, group of people, a special interest group of people. To try to use the race card against me is seriously weak because I have been sought out, stalked by a number of different special interest groups. And when I say a number of different special interest groups, I would say at least 100. Um, if a person can't sit and logically comprehend that a person non-transgender or transgender or homosexual or adult age or minor age has a right to say, I don't want to participate in a conversation that contains explicit sexual and constant sexual topic. Okay. So I'm sorry. I've asked you several times not to engage me in that type of conversation. So we can't be friends anymore. Okay. Now, I didn't say those words specifically. I simply started withdrawing from having conversation with this particular transgender person. But after that was when the transgender population started seeking me out to to uh, to bombard me with all kinds of um, negative and defensive conversation. And I'm like, look, I don't want to hear it. You know, you're working as a as an organized political uh, strategist, sir, and I'm not that I know of. And because if I meet a transgender person after I've withdrawn from a perspective friendship with another, just friendship, and it, an assumption is made about my character in regard to transgenderism from an individual transgender uh, interaction, as in there was really an onslaught after that. Um, and then it's such a political stand and so much more prevalent that then even non-transgender people are like, oh, that bitch, yeah, la, 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 la. And I've never said anything negative about a transgender person. I simply said that I have a right to withdraw a friendship or a prospective friendship from someone who hasn't listened to what I'm saying. I don't want to participate in sexually explicit conversation, not with a transgender person, not with a non transgender person, not with a homosexual person, not with anyone. Because, first of all, I don't have a friendship close enough with anybody right now to have that type of conversation with. I don't have I'm not engaging in an intimate or intimate relationship with anybody. And I don't, that is not my, oh, I just met you 6 weeks ago. Let's just freaking, lay it all out there. How many times you had sex this week and how, and this and what positions. I'm blown away by that kind and then the fact that they use the transgender race card to come back at me with, that's upsetting. And I'm their loss. They're not mine. But then back to the he, she pronoun thing, and my name coming now up as they, and my interaction with it, with the um, uh, domestic violence shelter employee. And she, sorry if I got that wrong, um, I don't know if that employee, she had dark hair and dark eyes, uh, was a transgender, but she called me into the office in a defensive tone, and I was sitting there flabbergasted because I'm like, "What is this woman? What is she talking about?" And then she starts talking to me about the pronoun thing, and I'm like, "Okay." And now I'm taken aback because I'm not a person who goes out of their way to try to hurt anybody's feelings. Not a transgender person, unless I'm like really been had a lot that week or that day already. Then I'm like, you know what? Just freaking get away from me. Um, and she started me with me about the pronoun thing, and I'm like, I didn't know about the pronoun thing, and now I'm remembering about Carrie at that same initial Dolores Project shelter. And Carrie came in after I had developed a friendship with the young person who was going through transgendering. And I mistakenly said to Carrie that she reminded me of who the heck was it? Red, the guy Red. He was a skateboarder. And the Carrie had already, I think, undergone transgender operation. And she literally went off at me. And I'm sorry, I'm just, becoming aware of the transgender population and whatnot. And the defensiveness that I had to deal with as an innocent and naive person um, was devastating because the transgender population had already established a very firm presence in Colorado. And I don't care what they say. Um, and my name is coming up as they. Um, because um so now I'm attached as the word they. I used to come up as she all the time. She. Every time somebody said the word she, it was like I was she. And I know that that was digitally done to my name, but I didn't realize at that time, because that was around this same time period that I'm talking about now, which is 2012, 13, 14, thereabouts. And the interaction with the sexually explicit conversationalist transgender was more recent, as in the past year and a half. Um, but not my name is back to the story of the pronoun thing with the employee who uh and I said to the employee of the domestic violence shelter, um I said, well, um I need to understand because um in other words, I needed to comprehend their thinking as to why, because, and I tried it. And then she said, no, you don't need to understand why. You just need to accept that you have to do blah, blah, blah. And I'm being a little more nasty toned than she was at the time. But and so anytime now that I or anybody use any pronoun, the transgender population now has um like cornered the market on pronouns, and they're not giving me a choice as to whether I want to participate in transgender politics, and I don't, because I've had a very negative experience with how the transgender population has conducted politics. And it is political. And it's another special interest group that I'm supposed to live my life in in intrepidously among. And walking on eggshells around. And I don't feel like it. I don't feel like constantly walking on eggshells, because there's so many different special interest groups that don't include me. And yet I'm looked at as the majority. I haven't been a member of a majority group, not in any way, pretty much my entire life. And I didn't set out to be uh, the most unpopular person in every situation that I was in, but I have a right to be who I am also. And I have a right to stand against a stupid race card that is seriously ridiculous for the number of gangs that are specifically created and are out throwing the race card against the most innocent person that they can possibly find. And there's the same people outside right now who are trying to control my thoughts, which tells me that whoever it is outside doing the bumping and the thumping with certain thoughts, that they're members of either the transgender population, or they're getting paid by the transgender population on some level. It's a political agenda, and it excludes the non-transgender heterosexual blonde-haired, blue-eyed, biological mother, Christian, who's unlike any Christian that anybody's ever met, for my individual and personal beliefs of what a Christian is, because I've not ever met another Christian who doesn't believe in partying. I've not met another Christian who doesn't believe that seeing angels or ghosts or demons automatically makes a person evil. And this, I'm sorry, is going into a more, but even this conversation is more mainstream. This is like the only part of mainstream I can enter. However, I can't enter it as a Christian because the Christians that I know had called me evil because I've seen ghosts and experienced a lot of paranormal activity since I was a child. And so, sorry, majority Christian population, I am a Christian and I believe in um that I lived in other lives, for instance. So my point here is that I don't fit into any of the pigeonhole places that they all keep trying to put me in. And I've innocently attempted to make friends and be friends with, I've had African American friends my entire life until Obama got into office. Okay? And and the first person who threw the race card at me was a black man who came to my window at when I was working as a bank teller at Colorado National Bank. And I was like, where'd that come from? And that was like 2000, no, 1999, or no, 1990, somewhere between 96 and 98, because then I started working for the building company. So my feelings were hurt because I'm not and was not a racist. And I became the dumping ground for all the people who were out partying together, and possibly the race issue came up because it was such, I mean, seriously, what were black people thinking? It's like somebody, a black person throws a race card at you, and you're thinking to yourself, what? That I have black African American friends. And I never said that like to the person, but I'm thinking it in my mind. And then they started saying, well, just because you have black friends doesn't mean you're not a racist. And so it's just been ongoing since the Obama administration. And on top of that, I I was on board with Obama becoming the president. I didn't vote, but I haven't voted. I don't think I've ever voted in any presidential election. I'm trying to think. I've still only voted in one or two, and they were both local um, um, things. So I've probably carried the bag in that regard without realizing it for all the illegal immigrants who are given illegal um, um, identification, mine probably being one of them. Sorry if I sound a little resentful. Um, who shouldn't have been voting but did vote, and I should have been voting and didn't vote. Um, what I'm saying is, take your race card because I don't accept it. And here's another thing, and this isn't a sermon. Seriously, in my homeless journey, I became very close to my Lord and Savior Jesus. And he has given me, and you can call me crazy because that's another strategy. He has given me permission and told me I don't have to be persecuted for other people's guilt of me, because my faith is strong enough that my Lord and Savior Jesus has said and let me know, yes, you have interpreted correctly that you have developed a faith strong enough to stand against persecution of yourself as an innocent of what you're being accused by those who are guilty of what you're being accused of. I think that's all I needed to say right now. It's not really what I got on. I never really, I'm like a broken record. And it's only because it's in my face with this stuff 24/7. Even up to this morning when I can't remember which platform or dashboard it is, because I'm only just re-entering the digital experience. I've hardly had a phone in my possession uh, since 2005. And again, 2005 is when the strategy of relieving me of digital property not to be attached. I don't want that word attached to my children because my children aren't property. They're not my former landlord's property. They're not they're not property of my former employers. And these are all people going back to residing under the roof of Gene and Charlotte Henderson that they were renting, that the landlord at those places have entered my personal life, and I can see men who I had sex with but knew weren't the biological father of my children were actually coming in and trying to claim my children. It's so obnoxiously and insidiously and bleh, the way that people have interfered in such a personal way in my life, which is via my children, my biological children, and the Civil Rights Act of Mr. Martin Luther King, the year that I was born, 1964, seems to have specifically left out blonde haired, blue eyed, white people, women, of having civil rights. And I'm going to reinsert myself as a human being who has as much right and civil right as Mr. Martin Luther King had when he decided to start the Civil Rights Act in 1964, the year I was born. So who's blaming me for being born because of the Civil Rights Act? The white people or the black people? I mean, it's crazy. And that's a rhetorical question because I'm getting it from both sides. And now I'm getting it from like however many special interest groups have been created since Mr. Martin Luther King's Civil Rights Act. And I'll tell you this also. I found a copy of the Civil Rights Act on the internet a number of years ago, and I read through it. Admitted, I don't like to use the word admittedly because then somebody comes at you on a completely different subject. You just admitted, and I'm talking about my experience right now, specifically and only in finding a copy of the Civil Rights Act. Or no, I'm sorry, it wasn't the Civil Rights Act. It was the Affirmative Action Act. And the affirmative action was created for African American people in regard to employment. And when I found a copy, not looking for a copy, again, it was something that I happenstance across, or maybe I thought about it. And I read through it, just skimmed across it, and it lists all the populations that would be included in the Civil Rights Act. And I did not see white Americans included, what I assume they're calling white Americans, because I feel like it must have been white American they were referring to as blonde hair, blue eyed people, because I feel left out of so very much that I can only logically deduce that in Black America's life or minds, that white America is blonde hair, blue eyed. However, I have not made any decisions in regard to who should be employed. I've never been in a position, in a hiring position. I've never been in a court position to make a court decision in regard to who's winning what. I've never been in a lawmaking position. So I'm just really wondering where anybody's logical brain cells went. Maybe they went to the cloud. And I know this topic wasn't what I got on the um, YouTube live stream for